When I told you about the DX-392 receiver in the previous video, I mentioned that the thing I hated most about it was the tuning. Whenever you turn the tuning knob, like when you are scanning an amateur or shortwave band, the receiver would mute at every channel. Commenting on that video, John Golub mentioned that there are some modifications that you could do to the receiver. Most notably, the anti-mute mod. I looked it up, and the first thing that came up was some information from W9JES. That page has information on the receiver and some modifications. Looking through the anti-mute mod, it was clear it was for the DX-390 or the ATS818. That is the receiver without the cassette deck. Electrically they're similar, but as I found out later, they were mechanically a little bit different, with slightly different layouts. To disable the mute, all you needed to do was to cut one connection, that going to the mute connection on the big microprocessor IC. There's 5 steps, and I got through to some of those steps. Disconnecting the power, yep, removing the volume knob, turning the receiver over and removing the 5 black screws to get the back off, yep, that was fine. Then locate and remove 5 silver screws from the circuit board. Now that's where I came unstuck, because mine didn't have 5 screws, only had 4. I removed the 4 screws that I saw, and I wasn't able to get the circuit board off. So at this point I did a bit more searching and found the service manual for the ATS818CS. That is the receiver with the cassette player. Looking at the disassembly instructions, that confirmed that there were only 4 screws required to remove the main printed circuit board. I had all those 4 screws removed, but still couldn't get the circuit board off, with as much levering as I would dare, as the board did seem to be fairly thin and somewhat flimsy, and breaking it would wreck the receiver and probably make it irreparable. Anyway, I gently probed around and found up here there seemed to be a sticking point, and all it was a bit of glue between the circuit board and the metal bracket that supported it. I briefly put the soldering iron into that melted the glue, and the board came off fine. So with that problem sorted, it was back to my first source to see how I could cut the mute connection. There's stuff here to do with the connector. There is a 12-pin connector and some photos. But that was nothing like with what I was seeing inside my receiver. So it was back to the service manual. The service manual isn't the greatest I've seen, but I was able to locate 2 7-pin connectors. One of them was pin 4, labelled mute, which was the one I was interested, and pin 4 on the other was ground. It's normally easy to identify the ground connections in connectors, so that gave me a bit of a lead. And there is no worries in relation to the numbering order of the pins, because pin 4 in a 7-pin connection is the middle, so that was a stroke of good luck. I didn't know all that before, and there is a period where I almost resigned myself to not being able to do it and giving up. Anyway, this is the inside of the receiver. I've screwed the board back on. As it turned out, I didn't need to remove those screws after all, but it was still useful for me to locate where these connections were. One interesting thing about the receiver is there's no connections between the battery holder or the antenna. They've just got springy bits of metal that make contact when the radio is put together. These are the battery terminals, and this is the antenna terminal. Not particularly great, and you want to keep an eye out for any intermittent issues that you might have. If you do have that, then there may be a bad connection and you might want to solder a wire between the antenna and the connection on the receiver board. Getting back to the mod, the bit of the circuit board you're interested in is the bottom left. And you'll see a row of pins, or at least it looks like a row of pins. There's actually 8, but the last one goes to a component, I think it's a diode. So it's really the leftmost 7 that we're interested in. And if we count from that, 1, 2, 3, 4, if you look very carefully at pin 4, you can see what I've done. I just got a hobby knife and cut a slit. I didn't need to cut the wire, and if I want to reverse the mod, I don't know why I would, but if I wanted to do so anyway, I could just solder a bridge of wire across where I cut it. And that's it. It made a world of difference. And it's almost like operating a new radio. Here's a test of the selectivity. I'm on AM narrow. This is a signal on 7149. And here's one on 7154. So not quite as selective as a communications receiver, but good enough unless the band is really crowded.
Punishment. They remember definitely psychological.
Overboard.
I know.
In discussing this exact same sub.
引领性比较强。铁六周年。
A Mediterranean origin person, then to say proudly that you're part Samoan.